Namaste and a warm welcome to all of you on a cold Delhi evening. I trust all of you and your families are safe and well. And as I say for other things that we are faced with today, this too shall pass. In a time such as ours, we seem to remember less and less of our anti-colonial struggle that unified our country, that inspired independence movements in Asia and Africa and the Americas, and the movement of civil liberties in the West, among others. The series that we've introduced, titled The Makers of Modern India, is our modest effort to ensure that our anti colonial heritage is not forgotten. Today, we talk about Sardar Patel and Khan Abdul Ghaffar Khan and the present day India. The democracy we enjoyed is now like a ship receding on the horizon. This is what our guest wrote in a magazine he published nearly 44 years ago, which went by the name Himmat, the Hindustani word for courage. Historian, academician, author, biographer, a former parliamentarian, and actively involved in moral rearmament, Shri Rajmohan Gandhi needs absolutely no introduction. He's authored biographies of Patel, Gandhiji, Khan Abdul Ghaffar Khan, and Rajaji, the last for which he received the Sahitya Akademi Award. Two of his recent works read like biographies of the region he chose to write, first Punjab and then South India. A confession, the parochial soul in me would like to hear him speak about the latter, but on some other day. Sri Rajmohan Gandhi is joining us. Namaste, sir, and welcome to our studio.
Thank you. Thank you, sir.
Speaking to Sri Gandhi is Shri Anil Nauriya. Shri Nauriya is an economist by training, a lawyer by vocation, and an avid historian. He's authored books on the Indian freedom struggle, Gandhiji, Acharya Narendra Dev, and he writes columns in the leading Indian dailies. So without further ado, I now cede the floor to Sri Gandhi and Sri Nauriya. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Welcome, Professor Rajmohan Gandhi. I think we can. You are quite well known to your audience, so I will only add that we have known you as defender of civil rights. We have known you as editor of Himmat, Bombay Weekly for many years. We have known you as resident editor of Indian Express and as a member of parliament, as a historian, as a biographer, and as a scholar of modern Indian history. Now, in the light of what we are going to be discussing today, I thought I would start by placing it in context. We are speaking today when it is going to be at the end of this month, 100 years since the non-cooperation resolution was endorsed by the plenary session of the Indian National Congress at Nagpur. 100 years of that mighty movement called non-cooperation, called the non-cooperation movement in India, which made such a remarkable change on the Indian scene between the years 2022, 1920, 22. And both the figures that we are talking about today, that is Vallabh Patel and Khan Abdul Ghaffar Khan, also known as Badshah Khan or Frontier Gandhi, were associated with that movement. Now, in the light of the fact that it is the centenary, I would start by requesting you to tell us something about how you see the relevance of the change that that movement brought about on the Indian scene today.
Thank you, Linji. I absolutely agree with you that the non-cooperation movement launched in 1920, which was then suspended in February of 1922, was a historic period for India, and especially for our freedom movement. And it is really amazing how many of the great figures that we love and we admire and read about, you might say, started their public life, national life, as a result of that movement. Khan Abdul Ghaffar Khan was one of them, Sardar Vallabh Patel, although he had started a little earlier also. Jawaharlal Nehru, Maulana Abul Kalam Azad, so many stalwarts, Jayaprakash Narayan, of course, Rajendra Prasad, Rajgopalachari, many others. And I'm sure, Anilji, some of your relatives and many others all across India, there were thousands and thousands of people who jumped into the freedom movement because of the non-cooperation movement. And I might also very quickly, briefly mention that just a year before the non-cooperation movement, 1919 was another very big event, of course. That is when the Jallianwala Bagh massacre took place in April of 1919. But most people have forgotten the genesis of the movement that led to the Jallianwala Bagh rally, which then invited that terrible massacre. And that was the nationwide struggle against the Rowlatt Act. And that was a struggle for free speech. So this, Gandhi did initiate the nationwide hartal on that issue. So free speech was the issue which sparked the agitation that led to the Jallianwala Bagh. And then there was this amazing national unity among all communities, Hindus, Muslims, Sikhs, everybody united in this non-cooperation movement. Now, most people have forgotten that some very powerful names from the, you might say, Hindu world, Muslim world, were all part of the non-cooperation movement. So yes, so I'm very glad, Anil, that you have referred to the background, that 3-year period. And one thing that is worth noting about that time is, as Acharya Kripalani wrote at some point, referring to that period, that was when people were reborn as Indians. A new kind of Indian emerged, and people took on the national cause. And people, you know, of course, there were superficial changes. People changed their clothes. They started wearing khadi and they started spinning. So daily life in practical ways changed. The dress of many Indians changed at that time. But more than that dress change or renewal was a new spirit that people accepted in their lives. And of course, one result was thousands and thousands of people were willing to go to prison. They were willing to invite being shot. Women also went into the movement. And so it was a kind of quite an amazing nationwide renewal. And it's wonderful that you remember this anniversary. The end of this year will be the anniversary, 100th anniversary of this historic non-cooperation movement that you might say changed national life in India. Thank you.
Thank you. And I would add about the agitation against the Rowlatt legislation that it was an assertion of citizenship rights. It was an assertion of a desire to be ruled by law. It was an assertion of the right to have judicial remedies, and all of which were denied in the Rowlatt legislation. And in fact, Khan Abdul Ghaffar Khan's first arrest comes in the course of the agitation against the Rowlatt legislation. In fact, his father, Behram Khan, was also arrested in the course of that agitation. So now coming to the figures we were referring to, Vallabh Patel and Khan Abdul Ghaffar Khan both emerged on the Indian scene as persons concerned with the rights and life of the citizens, the peasantry, and concerned with the civil and democratic liberties of the people. So, in the context of, let's take the peasantry first. Vallabh Patel, um, he first uh, becomes active in the 1918 Khera struggle in Gujarat, which is concerned with seeking remission of land revenue, and and then goes on in 1928 to again take up the question of the peasantry and challenging the enhancement of land revenue. So they were people like Vallabh Patel and Khan Abdul Ghaffar Khan also, who became active in the peasant movements in all over India. So he toured Bengal in 1931. He went to Bardoli in Gujarat and addressed a meeting of peasants, which was presided over by Kasturba Gandhi. And he went to Bilga in Punjab, where he addressed a meeting of peasants, which was attended by 100,000 peasants at that time in 1931. So, apart from his influence in the Northwest Frontier Province. And that was also the time when the national movement, in spite of not being in power, in spite of the nationalists not being in power, they conducted fairly extensive agrarian inquiries. We had the economic survey of the Matar Taluk conducted by Kumarappa on behalf of the Gujarat Vidyapeeth, backed by a fairly high-powered committee. And we had agrarian inquiries in the United Provinces at Congress behest, both in 1931 and 36. And similar exercises went on behalf of the nationalist movement throughout the country. So this sensitivity towards the plight of the peasant, towards the living conditions of the people, this is one characteristic of these two personalities and of the movement as a whole, about which perhaps you might wish to say something.
I'm very glad that you brought this out, Anilji, the total involvement of both Vallabh Patel and Badshah Khan in the lives and the struggles of the farmers of India. This was it was a constant part of their lives. They both were actually born into farming families, and as I'm sure you know, but others may not know, that both were also in their personal life expert farmers, gardeners. They grew flowers and vegetables. You know, when in prison, yes. Of course, both spent enormous. This is another thing to remember. Both of them spent many, many years. Of course, Badshah Khan spent 27 years. Vallabh Patel had a shorter total span in prison, British jails, imperialist jails. But in their prisons, they grew vegetables, they grew flowers, and they never forgot the life of the peasant, for which they were always struggling. And I think for those of our participants who may not be aware, I think it's important to also to kind of have some idea of the relative ages of these people. You know, these were contemporaries, but Gandhi was the oldest among them, and Vallabh Patel was younger than Gandhi by 6 years. But Badshah Khan was the youngest. He was younger than Patel by several years. I think, anyway, he was 21 years younger than Gandhi. So he was closer to Nehru's age. He was closer to Maulana Azad. I think it's good for us to remember. And I think I also want to give some idea of the physical characteristics. Because Khan Abdul Ghaffar Khan was this enormously tall person, 6'4", 6'5". Now, many people think that Gandhiji was a puny man, but that is not correct. Most people don't remember or realize that in physical height, Gandhi was taller than Nehru, and both were taller than Vallabh Patel was, in relative terms, the shortest physical terms of these. So I just wanted also to give this idea. But to return to their involvement in the farmers' struggle, this was an absolutely crucial aspect of their lives. And I'm glad you mentioned Badshah Khan's involvement with the peasants of Bengal, with the peasants of Punjab, with the peasants of Gujarat. And of course, as far as Vallabh Patel is concerned, the Bardoli struggle of 1928 revealed Patel as a tremendous organizer, as an organizer of the farmers. He was not just an inspirer or a leader or somebody who wrote and fought for farmers' rights. He actually organized the farmers of Bardoli in that absolutely historic non-violent struggle. That was a very important element in India's story of independence.
Right. So now, looking at it today, do you find the same sensitivity in our national life towards the people as a whole, or do you find that people have gone into little silos and they do not relate to problems of one another sufficiently well?
Of course, it's true, Anilji. We all know that so many of us, whatever our professions may be, whatever our ages may be, many of us have retreated into narrow goals and have taken our eyes off what is happening in the country or in the world as a whole. This is sadly true. It's true in many areas of our life. But I think it's also worth remembering that in the 1920 non-cooperation movement, and for many years thereafter, it isn't as if everybody was involved in national life. It was a struggle for all these people. I sometimes tell the story of this is a much later story in 1942, which was a huge movement. The Quit India movement was a very big, and of course Patel took a large part in it, and Abdul Ghaffar Khan also organized the Quit India movement in Panjab province, now called Khyber Pakhtunkhwa. But when Gandhi was arrested, many others were arrested. Then Kasturba also offered satyagraha, and she was arrested. And they were taking her and Sushila Nair, who was with Kasturba, also to prison. And they were waiting in the waiting room of a railway station in Mumbai to be taken to where Gandhi was imprisoned. Kasturba was to join. She was still a prisoner, but she was in the waiting room, 1942, August. And Sushila Nair writes afterwards about this time that they spent in the waiting room in August of 42, that Kasturba says, see, everybody is going about, walking about, they're smoking their bidis and cigarettes, they're having their cups of tea, they're conversing each other. No one is concerned. No one is concerned. Bapu is in prison. How will we win independence? So this was Kasturba's reaction at that time. I wanted to mention it because we should not imagine that when a struggle takes place that everybody is taking part in it. People may be sympathetic, but people have their own interests, their own concerns, their family situations. And after all, a struggle involves effort and risk. So you are right that today we are not necessarily involved as we should be in one another's struggles, in the farmers' struggle, in the struggle for civil liberties. But these things happen. But some people, like Patel, like Ghaffar Khan, they don't take their cue from what others are saying or doing. They follow what their heart tells them. They follow the commands of duty. And so they inspire us. So you're right about so many deficiencies in our national life today, but let us take heart from the lives of Patel and Badshah Khan.
Yes, I agree that we must not take a despondent view of things. So now coming to another aspect which I mentioned, that is about civil and democratic rights. And as I mentioned, both the Frontier Gandhi, Khan Abdul Ghaffar Khan, and Sardar Patel were interested in these issues and, in fact, went to prison um, protesting against lack of such rights. Now, in that, and Khan Abdul Ghaffar Khan makes some very trenchant remarks about the frontier crimes regulation in his autobiography. He specifically mentions Section 40 of the regulation, which could be used against anyone. He says that anyone walking on the street could be picked up and asked to give security. And before this talk, I was going through the frontier crimes regulation, and I found that if somebody failed to give security, he could be imprisoned for up to 3 years, and then again on the basis of another notice, another requirement to give security. So it could be theoretically repetitive. So it was an oppressive legislation which was repeated in different ways in different parts of the country, but in the frontier areas, it continues. Excuse me, with some amendments, it has continued till now. And in our country also, we increasingly encounter prosecutions, detentions based on insufficient evidence and or no evidence, and then after a long time, it emerges that there was absolutely no basis for placing somebody under arrest. So these problems, which Khan Abdul Ghaffar Khan and Vallabh Bhai encountered so many decades ago, are still with us. So, what are we supposed to live with them forever, or what should be course of action? There were in those days, there was a colonial setup. There was no adequate judicial redress. After the Constitution of India came into force, we are supposed to have judicial redress. But in a number of recent episodes, we have found in the last few years that people are taking law into their own hands. They cannot rely on effective interventions by the law and order authorities or even by the courts, which are erratic in their support in standing up for some people and not standing up for other people. So there is an atmosphere that is generated that leads to a feeling that an increasing number of people can take law into their own hands and will not come to grief as a result. How do you see this? I mean, it's something the whole national movement was undertaken to fight this kind of arrogance, and it's still with us.
Thank you. Of course, what you're saying is, alas, only too true. And it's good to remember, since we're talking about Patel and Bacha Khan and the non-cooperation movement, that the fight for independence of India was also a fight for the freedom of the average Indian. Ours was not only a fight for national independence, ours was a fight for individual civil liberties. India had to be free, and the Indian had to be free to think, to write, to speak, to organize. And so this was a very major component of our national freedom movement. And you're so right about the situation today and the enormous number of arrests where charges are not brought, where trials don't take place, and people not released on bail in so many cases. And so India has this very large number of people who they're called under trial prisoners, but there are people really these are no trial prisoners. And it is a great sadness. It's an unfortunate blemish on the record of independent India. And but occasionally we do find individual police officers, individual magistrates, individual judges of the High Court or a High Court bench giving a decision in favor of the citizen. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, I've just read that the Supreme Court has said that Dr. Kafil Khan in UP, that they've given a decision in his favor for his human rights. So the picture is undoubtedly depressing, but I think what we can learn from Patel and from Ghaffar Khan is that each individual can decide that he or she will not yield to injustice. Yes, if there's a price to pay, we may pay that price, but we will continue this struggle. But to return to your main point, Anilji, I absolutely agree with you that the fight for India's independence was also a fight for the civil rights of the individual Indian.
Now, related to this, I want to come to
I've lost your sound.
I think we've lost Anilji for a bit. He'll rejoin us. Chandra?
Have we lost him too? No, we haven't.
No, I'm of course here. So continuing the discussion, sir, we were saying?
No, we were discussing Anilji brought this up about the individual civil rights. First, he was speaking of the farmers' rights, but the rights of every citizen, and how India's freedom movement was also a freedom movement for individual rights. And Vallabh Patel himself was very strongly for individual civil rights. And of course, our constitution, which was created before Patel died, excuse me. So, and that was an incredible assurance that India's political independence, national independence, was to be accompanied by these rights that were guaranteed in the Constitution.
And I mean, as far as peasant movement is concerned, I mean, Patel also gave a lot of impetus to the cooperative movement, which started off in Kheda, which later became what we call Amul and the Kheda District Milk Producers Cooperative Union Limited. So there is a lot of, peasant.
No, thank you. No, that's a very good point you make, Chandra, that in addition to struggle against injustice, the cooperative movement, which eventually led also, among other things, to the remarkable Amul story, was a movement of cooperation among humble peasants, people who had one buffalo, two buffaloes, cooperating with neighbors, and women cooperating with others. And so the national spirit that was being created wasn't based only on jail going and meeting lathis, meeting bullets, that was there, but also how to cooperate with neighbors to organize and create a solid organization where people come together for everyone's benefit. So thank you, Chandra. Very important.
Yes, I was going to come to the emergency, but since you are on to the constructive aspect of the national movement, I will take another question first. The Khan Abdul Ghaffar Khan's speech at the Bombay session of the AICC in 1934 where he refers to his tour of Bengal. He had gone to Comilla and other places. And he says that he establishes a connection between the political movement and the constructive work movement, because people were saying that we should concentrate on politics, or we should concentrate on the constructive side of it, one or the other. So the point he makes is that when he toured Bengal, he found that where the constructive work movement had reached, people were willing to hear us. He says, जहां जहां चरखा पहुंचा, वहां वहां लोगों को दो वक्त नहीं तो एक वक्त, that is not twice a day but at least once a day, they could earn enough to get a meal, and they were willing to come and hear us. But where this had not happened, लोग हमसे कतराते थे. That is, people used to run from us, or were hesitant to come to us. So he said that we must continue with this constructive work program, and it will help also to win Swaraj. It's a small, pithy speech, very important speech in my opinion. And this seems to contain within it the reasons for the decline of some of the major political movements that we have had in India after independence, the neglect of the constructive work aspect. What is your view on this?
No, thank you again for underlining a crucial point. But before I comment on it, I would like, since you mentioned Bacha Khan and Charkha and so forth, I must mention that when I was able to go to Charsadda, his place in Panjab province, Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, when I began my research for his biography, I also discovered, my wife and I, we bought some khadi from Charsadda and Shabri chappals there. So the khadi spirit has continued in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa. So this also is worth noting. But I think this is a crucial point you make, that defiance against injustice, when it goes hand in hand with constructive, it need not always be charkha or khadi. It could be something else. It could be music. It could be producing a play, writing a poem, or cleaning together, improving a locality in our neighborhood. But in addition to struggle, constructive, this is a very important lesson for today, right today in India and elsewhere too, that yes, where need be, we should be willing to put up a struggle. And we can also, and sometimes there is no scope for struggle. Sometimes struggle becomes exceedingly difficult, if not impossible, because of restrictions, because of laws. But then there is always scope for constructive program. And then the moment comes when struggle can be resumed. So when you said about other national movements, post-independence movements, and some have succeeded, some have not succeeded, if some have failed, and you are hinting, Anilji, that maybe part of the failure is because there was not enough room, understanding of the value of constructive work. And I think, again, it's an absolutely important point. Because struggle is a great need. But we can learn from both these extraordinary individuals, Bacha Khan and Vallabh Patel. Nobody was more willing to embrace hardship, to embrace struggle. And we know of the end of the story. We know that Vallabh Patel became Deputy Prime Minister, Home Minister of India, became a great figure in the last 3 or 4 years of his life in terms of office. But how many years he spent in prison? And there was no guarantee that he was going to succeed. And Bacha Khan, we honor him, the world honors him. India has given him Bharat Ratna also. But he spent all these years, and when they went to prison, each of them was ready, if need be, to spend years and years. They were ready to die. So they turned their time in prison also into a time of reflection, of prayer, of strengthening their resolve. So some creativity, some positive action always accompanied their struggle. So we can learn so much from that.
Yes, and I should add that it was not just charkha, but the entire span of village industries, of work on Hindustani, that is the Hindi-Urdu mix, the work against untouchability, and so many multifarious activities that were undertaken in the course of the struggle. Mitu Petit set up an ashram for the depressed, and so there was it was a really cornucopia of activity that was offered to the country, and it therefore has vital importance. And it's a pity that not enough emphasis is paid to it today. But to come back now to the earlier part of the discussion, where we were talking about civil and democratic rights, and I was going to put to you a question about the emergency that we, in 1975, we have had that experience of an emergency that was declared and which lasted for 19 months. And we focused a lot upon it. It was a constitutional outrage, but it was a crystallized constitutional outrage. But now, looking back, um, can one not see the interconnections between political authoritarianism, social authoritarianism, and economic authoritarianism? And we reacted to the constitutional authoritarianism that we encountered. But that was only the crystallized form of various other kinds of authoritarianisms that we encounter. So if we see the interconnections between these varieties of authoritarianism, then we can even see the interconnection between the attack that took place in 1934 on 25th June on Gandhiji when he was in the course of his anti-untouchabilities tour in Pune, and the outrage, the constitutional outrage of 25th, 26th June 1975. And if we see it in the larger context, then we might be able to better analyze the situation today. What are your thoughts on that?
I absolutely and completely agree with you that we have to recognize that political oppression or some bans on meetings or some bans on associations, these are also very serious. They disturb us. They oppress many of us at times. But then so many other forms of oppression do continue in our society. Social oppression from so-called high caste or so-called low caste, so-called untouchables. And then there's the economic oppression by the better off, by the more privileged, by the more fortunate, the better educated, of many others. And so the systematic social and economic oppression has accompanied the political oppression. And we, again, from the armed freedom movement, which was not a perfect movement, but it was an amazing movement. But we can learn from Patel and Badshah Khan that all forms of oppression have to be tackled. Incidentally, sometimes, people ask me in relation to whether it's Patel, Badshah Khan, or Gandhi, that there is a complaint that these were remarkable people, but they didn't solve all the problems, which is a legitimate point. We have to concede that Gandhi, Patel, Badshah Khan were not, Nehru, were not able to solve all the problems of their time. Yes, they were imperfect people. But sometimes we go far beyond that. We say not only should they have solved the problems of their time, they should have also solved the problems of our time. We should, 3 generations after them, we should not face the problems we are facing. तो इन लोगों ने में ज़रूर कुछ कमी तो रही होगी. It's a perfect. I mean, it's one way of looking at it, but I think it shows how eager we are to give responsibility for change and great change and place that responsibility on the shoulders of some leaders. इन्हें ऐसा करना चाहिए. They must do this. They did not do this. Why did they make that mistake? Those may be valid points. But above all, let us, each one of us, see कि हम अपने कोने में, अपनी जगह में हम क्या कर सकते हैं, हमें क्या करना चाहिए. So each of us has to become a leader. I think this is something from Patel and Badshah Khan to learn. Each of us can become a leader.
Now, continuing in the context of the emergency and what led up to it, I wanted to bring you to the experience of anti-corruption movements in India.
Okay.
We have had 3 major rounds of anti-corruption movements.
Yeah.
1973, the Navnirman agitation in Gujarat, leading up to the JP movement in 1974. And then we had the movement against corruption in the late 80s. And then finally, we had the movement in the second decade, early part of the second decade of the 21st century. Now, what, in your opinion, for example, if you take the first movement, the Navnirman agitation in 1973 in Gujarat, which preceded the emergency, you had a situation where MLAs, legislators in the state of Gujarat, were being made to sit on donkeys with their face blackened and being told to resign. Because I think there was a great emphasis then on the people's right to recall a legislator. Now, all this was going on, and the emergency came some 2 years later. And then we had a number of events followed. And then we had 2 other rounds of anti-corruption movements thereafter. Now, in the light of the experience gained with these anti-corruption movements, would you think that these movements were too narrow in their focus, that they should have had an emphasis also on solving social and economic problems? They should have contained within them some social and economic commitment apart from the narrower focus on corruption. And even the definition of corruption was far too narrow because perhaps, in my opinion, because Gandhiji would have seen corruption as a form of debasement. He would have seen political debasement as corruption, not just the financial or economic bribe taking as corruption. That is, so in the light of this experience of these 3 major anti-corruption movements in India, what do you make of that experience? And you have also been part of some of those movements or have been sympathetic towards them.
Certainly. So a few comments on what you've said. First of all, you started with the story of or the picture of agitators placing MLAs on donkeys and blackening their faces. That is not an anti-corruption activity. That is a humiliation. That is some people forcing other individuals violently and rudely to do something, and that has nothing to do with freedom or with justice, in my opinion. So any compulsion forcing other people to do something is in my judgment cannot be part of any freedom struggle. So, but that is just in respect of the methods we adopt for our movement, no matter how wonderful our goal may be. But I think one major failure of our anti-corruption movements, to which you have not referred, Anilji, is the failure of the leaders of these movements to stay together and to remain united. One of several weaknesses in our national life has been that sometimes wonderful movements start, and there are different leaders, but then they're not always able to remain together. At the start of our conversation, we spoke about the non-cooperation movement. You know, the amazing thing that Gandhi and Patel and Nehru and Maulana Azad and Khan Abdul Ghaffar Khan and many others who joined the struggle at that time stayed till the end as brothers and sisters. Their unity survived, it endured. In the case of some more recent movements, we haven't had that kind of solidarity over a long period of time. So that weakness of not remaining united for the positive goals of our movement has also been a very major weakness. But the other weaknesses, failings that you have mentioned, shortcomings, should also be absolutely understood and recognized. So thank you.
Thank you. Then from there, I would like to take you to this whole question of our composite culture, which I thought it would have been good if these anti-corruption movements had reflected and sought expressly to strengthen our composite culture.
So include that as part of the movement, yes. To include
yes.
that as part of the movement, yes.
Yes, because destroying our composite culture is a form of debasement of our society and our politics, which is corruption in the larger sense.
Allow me, Anilji, just sorry to interrupt you, but I absolutely agree with you, but I'll add one more point. One great feature of whether of Bacha Khan, Patel, Gandhi, Nehru, that when something like that happened in society around them, if one section of the community, of the nation, one section was attacked or humiliated, they would stand up and speak very strongly against it.
Yes.
So this was a very crucial part of our whole freedom struggle. That yes. When things went wrong, and when injustice took place, or when the composite culture or bhaichara of friendship or mutual respect, dignity.
Yes.
So when dignity was assaulted, mutual respect was not forthcoming. They would speak up, and they yes. would correct the thinking of society. So they were like teachers. They were not just people who thought up strategies. They were educating and encouraging. All of us human beings have both good impulses and bad impulses. Lincoln in America, where I am now, had this phrase: to call forth the better angels of our nature.
Yes.
So, human beings in India too, despite all that we see, all the extremism, the dislike, the othering of people, still if only we had leaders who would summon the better angels of our nature. uh, against divisiveness, against blaming one section. I mean, this is, of course, the greatest shortcoming in today's India, is how we are allowing our Muslim brothers and sisters to be, you might say, assigned to a section, some kind of inferior section, and we don't speak strongly about it or clearly about it. And it's not only up to national leaders or political leaders, all of us, wherever we are. I mean, this is such an attack on Indian culture, on the spirit of our freedom movement, on humanity, How can we allow a section of our people to be ill-treated, disrespected, excluded? This is a, so some of these movements which focus on corruption, you're absolutely right, that when we don't make inclusiveness, the fact that India belongs to everybody, that everybody is equal in India, whether we are Dalits, whether we are Christians, whether we are Sikhs, whether we are Muslims, whether we are atheists, whether we are whatever, communists, we are entitled to equal rights. And anyone from these backgrounds is entitled to equal respect from me. So thank you for underlining what perhaps is the most relevant point of all.
In fact, before speaking to you, I was reading Khan Abdul Ghaffar Khan's autobiography, and he refers to Bamiyan, and how proud he is of. Now, this is an autobiography which was published in 1969.
Yeah,
and he refers to the fact that Bamiyan boasts of two of the largest statues of the Buddha, and how proud he is of the fact that his region is host to these two statues of the Buddha. And you can sense that love of the composite culture of South Asia is every cell of Badshah Khan's.
Sorry to interrupt you, but when he was in Kabul as an exile for some time, and some people from India went to meet him there, he would take them to the Bamiyan statue. He was show them. He was a very devout Muslim. I mean, Khan Abdul Ghaffar Khan was, as I know personally from my encounters with him, was a very devout Muslim. But he took non-Muslim visitors from India, Hindus, to the Bamiyan Buddhas with great pride.
Yes.
To show that. So that is absolutely correct.
And can one, you have written a biography of Sardar Patel. I consider that one of your best books, if I may say so. It's so deeply researched. And can you conceive of Sardar Patel backing a movement for the destruction of a place of worship?
Of course not. Of course not. Of course not. Of course not. And Sardar Patel, this was in December of 1948. So he spoke at the Congress session in Jaipur, All India Congress, which was a plenary session of Congress in Jaipur in December of 48. And he's made a very strong, I was present as a boy, but I still remember it. Of course, after my research, I noticed exactly what he said. That he said that India had to be a secular state, absolute secular state. And so he was a very proud Hindu, he was a staunch Hindu, but he was a staunch defender of equal rights for all in India. And of course, he, sort of Hindu Rashtra, he called it a mad idea, a wrong idea. So no, he would not have, absolutely not have led or supported any movement for destruction of any place of worship.
Yes. And let me now, you spend a lot of your time in the United States. So I wanted to ask you a question about Indians living abroad, especially in advanced, prosperous countries like the United States and UK and Canada. Uh, there were Indians there also at the time of the freedom movement. You know about them, we know about them. They were sympathetic to the freedom struggle. Many of them were revolutionaries in Europe, in the United States, in the UK. Do you see a change in the nature of the Indian in these countries now? And if so, what accounts for that change? Can you conceive of Indians at that time ever backing sectarian setup in India?
No, not at all, not to the same extent. But I think, Anilji, we must also recognize that the world has changed. Let us recognize that America has changed, Europe has changed, Turkey has changed, Hungary has changed, Poland has changed. So there is this thing that some people refer to as ethno-nationalism, which has taken place. That a nation does not belong to everybody, it belongs to one dominant section. So this is a spirit that has grown in the world. Whites must control America, Hindus must control India, a particular kind of Muslims must control Iran or Turkey or whatever. And so, or similarly in Hungary and Poland. So what you're saying about the Indians in America is right, but it is some kind of a global trend. Mind you, I believe that it is not a permanent trend. Let us remember that, in India today, yes, unfortunately, we have this polarization, we have this divide. But people have forgotten. We started by speaking of the non-cooperation movement. And non-cooperation movement involved very much the Hindus and Muslims together at that time, fighting also for the rights of the Muslims of Turkey, the Khilafat movement, as it was called. And one of those who supported it before he died was Tilak. People have forgotten this. So Hindus and Muslims, Swami Shraddhanand, various people took part in that kind of movement. So at that time, Hindus and Muslims were in solidarity. Hindus and Muslims, they had not always been that. 1909 came the separate electorates, and of course, after 1857, the British tried to divide and rule and succeeded. But we Indians cooperated. As Maulana Muhammad Ali used to say, that it's not correct that they divide and rule, the British. We divide and they rule. That was his. And so, but at that time, we have forgotten. There was amazing ground level Hindu-Muslim partnership also. And it will come back in good time. But it depends on all of us. And of course, if eminent people, loved people, respected people give a clear direction, then thinking does change. If poets and writers of plays and makers of films create the right atmosphere, that also helps. These things can't be commanded, they can't be made to order. But I think we must keep that memory alive. Ek zamane mein aisa tha. But we must also remember one very important thing, that despite our composite culture, despite the fact that Muslims, Hindus, Sikhs, we all fought together for freedom, the real fusion at ground level never took place. Real fusion, real knowledge of one another, did not take place. And so if only we can work towards that, even today, in our very small circles, if we can get to know much more about the other group, study about them, read about them, listen to them, if we can build real solidarity even on a modest scale in our own circles. And eventually, the picture will change all over the world, in India, among Indians overseas, among Indians in India. The picture will change in due course.
Now, I want to come to one last major topic that I wanted to discuss with you. And that is the question of the role of money power in our elections and in our political process as a whole, and in the setting of our economic priorities. Um, now in the United States, we've long had money playing a major role in elections. And in India, Justice Chagla had warned in a judgment in the Bombay High Court in the 50s that money bags can destroy democracy. Now, in the light of our experience, the national movement at the time when Vallabh Patel and Khan Abdul Ghaffar Khan were participating in it had the backing of some nationalist-minded patriotic business houses. You had the Godrej some house, some of their properties were auctioned. You had the House of Bajaj, which suffered a great deal in the course of the struggle. You had even the Tatas sympathetic to the struggle, helping even in South Africa when Gandhiji was there. He occasionally got help and sympathy from Indian enterprises based in India. And these industrial houses were creating value and creating enterprises for manufacturing goods within the country. And they had an eye on making India self-reliant. They were not fly-by-night operators. Now, has the nature of Indian capital, the big business house, changed over time in such a way that they are now not concerned with creating value for society as much as they used to be, and their obsession with quick profits and operations which do not necessarily create real produce value for the country, they don't set up brick and mortar establishments, and they, for the purpose of a quick profit, they do not set much store even by the compositeness of our society. Has there been a change in the nature of the big business house from the period of, say, the 30s and 40s to now? And if so, what kind of impact has that had on our society and politics and culture and economy? And what do you think is the prospect here?
Of course, things have changed. Of course, money plays a very bad role and generally a very nefarious role in elections. And so you're entirely right there. This electoral bonds arrangement seems such a sad arrangement for a country, a dignified country, an honorable country, to have a law like that you can donate money secretly and then claim some tax benefits from it. To me, it's a very, very sad arrangement. But so it's absolutely correct what you say, that many of our richest people, most successful business houses, seem not to be concerned about the real life situation of so many of our people. But then we must also realize that a lack of concern or lack of involvement in our neighbors, in our fellow citizens, in our brothers and sisters, is a common failing in most of us. And so we should not be shocked if some special business houses fail to make the nation their top priority. We should be disappointed, of course, and we should try and see what we can do to inspire them to do more, or if we are in government, to compel them to do more. But let us also not forget that in recent times, when the migrants were moving and so many other acts of suffering, so many individual, they may not have been, I don't know, to divide them into very big houses, small houses, medium houses, but so many people, including some well-off people, really gave money, gave their time to look after the neediest in our country. So many people, gave their time. We all know of people who, on their bicycles or in buses, went and distributed food. So there is still goodness in the Indian mind, even in the minds of some businessmen. So, but your general point is absolutely valid. We have to recognize it about the influence of money on elections and the misdirection of huge resources by very big companies. It's absolutely valid. But I think we should also recognize that this is perhaps not the failing of just one class of Indians, but it is part of a national shortcoming, a human shortcoming, and it is something we must be aware of. Where necessary, put up a struggle against it. Where necessary, do something about it, if possible.
Especially the question of social harmony and business. I would have thought that a responsible business house would understand that social harmony in India would create a conducive environment even for business. So the change that seems to have occurred is that business houses, the large business houses, I don't speak of everyone, do not seem to have the same concern for our composite culture that they once may have had. And I'm sort of troubled about where this could lead us. I see waste of resources. I see projects being started which involve crores and crores of money which could have been spent more appropriately on persons, on classes deserving of that relief. But instead of that, we see a diversion of resources into directions which do not seem to appear to show any concern for society or for large sections of it. So do you see any hope at the end of it?
I may not see evidence of significant change in that area, but of course, the ultimate hope comes from our own belief in humanity and in the future of the world. So, that hope I have. If you ask me if I'm seeing great evidence of big business houses helping composite culture or helping to overcome the polarization in our society that has taken place, maybe it is not happening. But in a small scale, I think in all our neighborhoods, we will find people who are doing it. So we are not going to give up on that hope. And ultimately, people take a cue from others. They are always seeing which way the wind is blowing. Businessmen, rich people particularly do that. So I think we should diagnose all these shortcomings in our society, in our economy, in our big business houses, in our political parties, in our judicial system, in our legal system, in our media. My God, we haven't spoken about the media. All that we should recognize. But I would say that more of our energy should go into creating solidarity wherever we can, on a small scale, on a large scale if possible. Especially, I would again say that the role of the individual writer, the individual poet, the individual novelist, the artist, the playwright, the actor, these are also very, very important in dealing with the very sad situation that we face.
Yes, I'm glad you brought up the question of the media, because Khan Abdul Ghaffar Khan himself had started 2 journals during his life. And throughout the national movement, the leaders of our freedom movement were very conscious of the need to express themselves through some written word, apart from their tours and speeches and so on. And they were therefore constantly and continually facing trouble from the authorities under sometimes their press would be confiscated, sometimes they would be asked to give security, and so on. That is another aspect of the money power today, that the media also has been largely ceased to be independent from the large business houses. The press commission in India, the first press commission, had focused on this question of separating, or the media houses remaining a little separate from business enterprises. And I think the second press commission also stressed on that. But all those norms seem to have been largely forgotten now. Anyway, yes, please go ahead.
Just make one point. Most of the leaders of our freedom struggle were, as you say, they were writers also. But both the people we are discussing today, Vallabh Patel and Badshah Khan, they were relatively unwilling when in prison to write books. Many others, when they were in prison, they wrote journals, they wrote books. But Nehru did, and many others, Gandhi did, many others. But Maulana Azad did. But neither Patel nor Khan Abdul Ghaffar Khan used their time in prison to write. This is just one. They were people that others wrote about, and they inspired others to write. But just a point of historical information, that these two themselves did not write. But you're right that Badshah Khan started this journal called the Pakhtun, very important journal in the frontier province. But yes.
And Das Rosa was the other one.
Yeah, okay.
When you were writing your book on Khan Abdul Ghaffar Khan, did you come across files of Pakhtun and Das Rosa?
No, because although I did visit the province twice for that, I didn't have enough time to go into libraries there or archives there. So no, I did not find those.
I hope some researcher in that area will one day put some of these writings together.
Absolutely, and the Ghani Khans and Wali Khan, both sons of Badshah Khan. Ghani Khan was a great poet and a great artist and a sculptor. I mean, an amazing man.
And he was also a member of the Central Assembly.
Ghani Khan, maybe. But Khan Abdul Ghaffar Khan was a member of the Constitutional Assembly, both in India and then in Pakistan.
Yes.
But, look, you know many more facts about these people than I know, which I'm very pleased about.
Hardly.
Pleased about. Yeah.
So thank you, Professor Rajmohan Gandhi. It's been a lovely discussion with you, very educative. and it brought up a number of interesting points, and I hope listeners would benefit. And if I don't know if there's time for questions and answers, maybe Chandra can tell us.
I think that we can take a couple of questions if Professor Gandhi, you have the time. There are about 4 questions that are flashing on the screen. I'll take them one by one. The first question is from Ashok Mathur. It's on the screen. It says, "My question to you, Rajmohan Gandhi ji, what reasons do you attribute to the weakening of the Gandhian ideology today, that even the opposition towards the West, etc., don't seem to be referring, left, etc., don't seem to be referring to him much, particularly Congress, despite Gandhiji's ideology being more relevant today? Where are we failing?" It's a rather broad sweep of a question.
It is part of you might say, decline in many areas in our country. But so, and look, I don't think we need to worry too much in a way, Gandhian ideology or Nehruvian ideology or Patel's or Bacha Khan's ideology. So I don't think that we have to preserve any particular individual's ideology, no matter how great the person may be. And I think the question is connected to the point I'd already made, that we expect a person like Gandhi, who died almost 75 years ago, so several generations have gone past. In America, nobody says what has happened to Lincoln's ideology. People are concerned, hum kya kare? What should we do? It is not the preservation of Lincoln's ideology that will save America. It is every individual doing the right thing today. So I think those of us who respect and love Gandhi or Bacha Khan or Patel or Nehru, Maulana Azad, we have to figure out what we should do today, not how we can preserve the ideologies of these wonderful human beings. What is it that today's situation requires? Yes, and then as far as the Khuda Khidmatkars were revived in India about 11 years ago or so. It was fantastic. Yes. And as far as Gandhi is concerned, he continues to inspire people all over the world. My interaction with African Americans in the United States shows how strong a force Gandhi remains intellectually, ideologically, and he remains like that in India too. So, and one of the most wonderful things in recent years has been how Gandhi and Ambedkar have come together on many platforms. So that is also a very remarkable and wonderful thing. But in short, those of us who want to preserve mutual respect, dignity, liberty, equality, fraternity, should work for fundamental ideas, should work with everybody, and not be over concerned about the ideology of A or B or C is strong today or not.
The next question is from Jamal Kidwai. He says, what does Hindu-Muslim unity mean in today's context, as opposed to the freedom struggle where obviously they were united in fighting against an external agency?
Tremendous question. And I think above all, it means that in our personal depends on who we are. Supposing I'm an editor, or I have a column, or I'm a leader, and I have a following, my tweets are seen by millions, then if I am concerned about it, I must express myself against humiliation, domination. So that is what Hindu-Muslim unity would mean today. But if I'm not any of these, but in my circle, if I hear any kind of negative remark, any kind of othering, any kind of blaming of another section, another community, then it is my duty to, my family, it's my duty to correct it. So we have to show leadership. So when there is, as I said, there is this ethno-nationalism wind blowing all over the world today. India doesn't only belong to the Hindus, India belongs to Muslims. India belongs to atheists, Christians, Sikhs, Dalits. So whenever we have the chance, we must emphasize that every fellow Indian has equal rights. If you're a judge, if you're a policeman, if I'm a police officer, I must train my police in this. In the army, wherever I am, I must never fail to emphasize that this country belongs to everybody and everybody's rights are equally important. That is what Hindu-Muslim unity means today.
May I add a footnote to that?
But
I was a student in 1969 when Khan Abdul Ghaffar Khan came to India for the Gandhi centenary. And that was the time when there was intercommunal trouble in Gujarat, in Ahmedabad in particular.
yes.
And Khan Abdul Ghaffar Khan, on coming to India, he had been a leader of undivided India. He was now coming to this part of India. And he chastised the country. He chastised us. He said things to us which we would not have taken from anybody else, but we took it from him because I think the country just listened because they realized that the person who was speaking was somebody who had brought us freedom. And so we listened to him. I was actually a school child, but the whole country listened to him as though they were school children listening to Khan Abdul Ghaffar Khan. And the memory of that chase, there was hardly anybody who resented it. I do remember that there was a stray editorial here and there in some paper. But apart from that, the whole country heard him in silence. And so it is the courage that we must cultivate to speak and to hear.
Thank you.
There is a question. I mean, this might just be linked. It says, to what extent did Patel's personal faith dictate his role as an administrator post-independence? I think this
tremendous question. So I can give a very short answer to this. He was, as I said, he was not a temple-going Hindu. He was a staunch Hindu. He was not a temple-going Hindu at all, but he was a staunch Hindu. But you can say his heart was Hindu, but his hand was just. His hand was just. His hand, as a ruler, he did not discriminate between, he applied the law. And as head of the police, he wanted the police to protect everybody, not just the Hindus, not just the Muslims. So he was a staunch Hindu. He was not a temple-going Hindu. This is important to note. And he was, he was, some of his close relatives, his father was a very devout temple-going Hindu, and Vallabh Patel didn't share that. For whatever reason, he felt that sometimes the priests were not as straightforward as they should be. So he stayed away from that. Of course, he was a staunch Hindu, and he made no bones about it. But he, as Home Minister of India, as Deputy Prime Minister of India, his job was to protect every single Indian, no matter his or her faith.
A couple of more questions if you have the time, Professor Gandhi.
Sure.
Okay, this comes from Sonia Kumar. It reads, in their respective countries, Patel and Badshah Khan have been viewed differently post-independence. The latter has been seen as a figurehead who stood against the oppression of the army, while the former is seen as a unifier of the nation. How far has this been dictated by their respective philosophies?
Yes, well, it is true.
I'll just read it again.
No, I've got it. I've got the question. So I can see it also. I don't know about how they're being viewed is connected to their respective philosophies, but it is a fact. It is a fact and I think people are aware of it, that Badshah Khan was against domination by military rulers. And Vallabh Patel was very much a unifier of India. So these are correct views. Vallabh Patel played a tremendous part in the unification of India, tremendous part. It's not as if he did it by himself. He was aided by many. And Jawaharlal Nehru also was a very strong supporter of Vallabh Patel in the work of but yes, Vallabh Patel did more than anybody else to bring all the states of India together. So, and Badshah Khan stood up against oppression. So these are absolutely valid images. And so we can learn from both of them. Our job is to prevent oppression, and our job is to help unification. So I think we can be very grateful for both these remarkable characters.
The last question of the day is from Sanjay Hazarika. It says, lots of people are moving out of the business model of journalism. Anil, it's all about microblog. Okay. The question is a different one. It says, can you share your thoughts on the media, the abuse of social media and fake news?
Yes.
As to Professor Gandhi.
So
yes,
so I mean, I don't know what I can suggest to address this. We know that there is this abuse of social media. There is the abuse of television. There is the abuse of television to spread toxicity, anger, polarization. So I think really each one of us, wherever we can, we have to be creative and see how we can use social media also for constructive purposes. I think we need to be more energetic. Those of us who feel we have good views, or we have views that will unite the country and keep the composite culture alive, we have also to use whatever opportunities we get. So I don't know, but I think that this is where I'm since 85, and although I'm trying to get younger, I'm not succeeding in that project. But it is the poets, the creative, the actors, those who understand technology. By the way, I don't do any social media. I don't do Facebook, nothing. I'm able to do Zoom. I can do some email. That's my limit, sadly. But
you're running the Himmat blog.
Yeah, I can type. That happens. But I want other people are making some wonderful YouTube things which are going, which are available. But I think more of us should creative people should put out their stories, their views on YouTube. I think this media is available to everybody. So instead of spending our time on how terrible the rest of the media is, let some creative people, capable people, now produce more stuff. Put it out there. Songs, music.
That's one of the things that even we at Ganga Jamuni are trying to do. I mean, you brought the whole composite culture up, and that's one of the things that we've been trying to do. It's a modest effort, but we're hoping that at some point in time it'll bear some fruit.
Well, you're doing tremendous, and I respect you for that. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
So thank you, Professor Gandhi. It was wonderful talking to you. Thank you, Chandra, and thank you, Shagufta, for organizing this, both of you.
Rajmohan Nauriya, thank you very much for this very illuminating talk and for shedding light on our anti-colonial struggle, which is actually the real protagonist of today's talk, and about how it continues to be relevant even today. And let's rephrase it, it's actually more relevant today than before. And our composite culture and its need was brought out beautifully throughout the course of the discussion. And we at Ganga Jamuni aim at promoting cross-cultural understanding Our name itself signifies as much a conscious effort to hark back to the distinctive elements of our composite culture as a refusal to accept the erosion of such elements from our daily life. Thank you once again for taking time out of your busy schedules. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. Good night. Good morning.
For all of those of you out there, please tune in at 7 p.m. on 7 p.m. India on Saturday, December 19th for Kya Delhi, Kya Lahore, a collaborative talk and discussion between Dr. Swapna Dil from Delhi and Dr. Tahir Kamran from Pakistan. Thank you very much.